Okay, we Snyder fans need to call a huddle. What is up, everybody, and welcome to my review of Part 2 of Rebel Moon, titled The Scargiver. Now, if you did not check out last year, we had Rebel Moon Part 1, Child of Fire, I believe it was called. The first of two parts, at least that have been announced so far, of a Zack Snyder space sci-fi action epic that is exclusively on Netflix. And the first part was pretty much a critical punching bag, as if most recent Zack Snyder films don't become that inevitably. But I was actually one of the more positive people on it. I'd certainly had a lot of issues with it. I did not love the film, and most of which I was just really fucking annoyed at the fact that yet again, here we are waiting for the real cut of the movie, and we are forced to watch a 2-hour PG-13 advertisement for the true story. But I was intrigued with the world. I was bought in. I was optimistic that hopefully at least the second half of it would make the entire story feel better, until inevitably we watch the 6-hour cut of the entire story that will probably make it feel even better. So where the first film was all set up, involving Sofia Boutella gathering a bunch of warriors to come back and defend this agriculture planet from these invading soldiers that are going to not only likely kill everybody, but take all of their grain. The second film is all of the payoff for that. It's them bunkering down and training and getting ready to face off against these incoming soldiers, and then the entire second half of this film is essentially one big battle. And the tricky part when you have two-part films is that a lot of times the first half feels very exposition heavy, it feels a little bit anticlimactic, it feels like it's just a lot of setup, and then the second half of the film feels like it's all payoff and there's not really enough character or story development. So did Part 2, The Scargiver, add everything that was missing to the first film? Did it bring it home? Did it invest me in this universe and make me really excited for the eventual director's cuts and the potential for other movies that Zack Snyder has blueprints for? Am I bought in on Rebel Moon? Starting off with the positives, a lot of the same things that I said with the first part, where Zack Snyder's a very visually driven director. He is a visual storyteller. He has a very cool visual style, whether it's the color grading of his films, whether it is his use of CGI that I think has a very clean look to it, some of the way that he frames action and shoots action. I think this is another visually strong effort from Zack Snyder, and being that the entire second half of this film is essentially one big battle, there's a lot of opportunities to show different sides of that, with hand-to-hand combat, with gunplay, with giant mechs and giant tanks and space battles and explosions, and there's a lot of cool shit to look at in this movie. It looks nice. Sofia Boutella's character, as well as her performance, I think is still good here. A lot of people didn't care for what she did in the first film. I was one of those people that thought that she led the film very competently, and here she gets a little bit more room to be emotional. There's a lot more things at stake with her character and with the world. This is all of the third act, tension is high section of the story, so I think she does good yet again, and I think she's very believable and very effective at being the titular Scargiver, being somebody that is just so violent and so badass that they actually have a nickname that is known across the galaxy. I also really like Djimon Hounsou. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, because I love this guy. I love him so much. I think he's one of the most underutilized assets in Hollywood, and every time he shows up in something, he makes it better. He had a kind of a small role in the first film, as did most of the characters. Here, he's basically co-lead. Like, he's the one that rises up and kind of is the leader of the warriors and the leader of the on-ground effort, on-ground defenses, and I really like what he did. I think that he's great in the dramatic side of things, he's great in the monologues and the exposition side of things, and he's just a badass motherfucker. So even if you just want to sit back and just watch him kick the shit out of people and give like these war cries to everybody behind him, "Rah!" He's the guy you want to do that. I also thought that the character of Gunner got a nice little promotion in this one. There's a lot more emotion with his character and his relationship and budding romance with Sofia Boutella's character. And by the end of the film, I think that he was one of the more standout performances and standout character arcs here. So I liked his character as well. There's some really solid moments in the last 45 minutes or so where you get some nice payoff, one of which involving the android character that is voiced by Anthony Hopkins, that has spent a movie and a half just basically standing around looking at shit and giving us, you know, dialogue, a little bit of narration over the tops of the movies and over certain scenes. He finally gets to actually be an active participant in the badassery. So that, among a few other things in the last half of the film, was pretty standout moments. But unfortunately, that's about all positive that I have to say about this one. I didn't really like this. I actually enjoyed it less than the time that I had with the first half. And if I'm being even more honest, I think that seeing this second half and seeing the conclusion of the story and now having the full picture of Rebel Moon Part 1 and 2, it retroactively makes me like the first half a little bit less, because I just found this second half to be so anticlimactic and so unsatisfying, and a myriad of other things that I'm going to get into here, that it just makes the whole package feel worse for me. Now, before I get into my negatives, let me state this clearly, because I know I'm going to get a few you fuckers, at least in the comment section, that aren't going to listen to plain English whatsoever and are just going to jump into your bullshit narratives. I am a Zack Snyder fan. I have enjoyed every single movie that he has made, save for Sucker Punch. Now, I do think that there are flaws with a number of his films. I'm not somebody that thinks that he is without fault. I'm not somebody that thinks that his films are just immaculate and genius and impenetrable. Not that level of Zack Snyder fan, but I really do like what he brings. I am a fan of his work. So while I'm going to have quite a few negative things to say about this film, it comes from a place of just being disappointed as a fan and being somebody that roots for him that just didn't have a good experience with this film. It is that simple. So let's go ahead and get this out of the way, since I'm going to be kind of repeating myself a bit from the first review. The fact that yet again we are very clearly getting a hacked down version of this story, and we are already being advertised out the ass for the true version of the film that's going to be coming out presumably by the end of this year, that's going to be rated R and have a bunch of sex and a bunch of violence and totally different universe and even different takes of the same dialogue. That shit just annoys the living fuck out of me, okay? Like, I'm right there with you when it comes to WB. They fucked Zack Snyder. His true vision of Batman v Superman and his true vision of Justice League are significantly better than the hack jobs that WB decided to put out to the theaters. You will get no argument from me when it comes to those two films. However, with Rebel Moon, it's been very clear that Zack Snyder and Netflix, as a collaborative team, have manufactured, for no reason, yet another Snyder Cut debacle, where Netflix does not have to and typically does not release their shit to theaters, so the ratings of the movie really don't fucking matter at all, and yet they wanted to do the PG-13 2-hour cuts of these two individual films and let Zack Snyder have a second round of promotion and get another round of clicks months later with the 3-hour rated R true versions of the film. And when you watch part 1 and now when you watch part 2, the whole experience feels like you're watching a 2-hour trailer for the actual movie. And that's just fucking obnoxious. That's self-indulgent, that's ridiculous. And I hope to God that they learn the right lessons from everybody's annoyance with this and does not continue it going forward, namely Zack Snyder, because even somebody who is a big Zack Snyder fan, if this becomes the habit of every time we get a new Zack Snyder film, we get 3-4 different versions of it, I'm gonna fucking tap out, because that's just bullshit. Where in the first film there was very clearly a lot of things cut out from the middle act of the film that developed these characters that they were running around the galaxy gathering. Here, there's not specifically like an act of the film that you can feel a lot of things cut out, but the movie feels so quick with its series of events. It's like, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, credits, get the fuck out. Nothing gets to breathe. None of the lore gets to be further explored. None of the characters really get to be further explored beyond quick little exposition dump flashback sequences that are yet again back to back to back. And so you watch this and you just see the entire film, things being cut out of it for time. Moving on from that, this does have the classic issue of being a part 2 story where it feels very much like it's an entire film of third act shit. And there's not a lot of really compelling stuff in the first 45 minutes or so of the film, it feels like it gets to a very slow start, and then all of a sudden it's just nothing but insanity for the last half of the film. And if you watch these two films together as a 4-hour cut, maybe that problem goes away, but that's not how they were released. They were released as two separate stories, and even if you plan them and release them and advertise them as multiple parts to a whole, the parts should still survive on their own as a satisfying story, as a satisfying journey. And this is one of those part movies that I don't think achieves that. Yet again, all of the characters feel underdeveloped. You feel like you're at arm's distance with all of them. You don't feel like you get to know much about them. They seem very one note. And I feel like most of what I do like about the characters that I got something out of just has to do with the fact that I like the actors that are portraying them. Like Djimon Hounsou, I love him as an actor. Can I tell you very much about his character? No. And I gotta tell you, I made a joke in the part 1 review that movie reminded me so much of A Bug's Life that it was comical. And I understand A Bug's Life to an extent is taking inspiration from things like Seven Samurai and, much older films that this is taking direct inspiration from. But the thing with the grain and certain lines of dialogue were just so spot on. It carries over here. Like, instead of a giant fake fucking bird, they put a spaceship into a hiding spot to enact their plan. It's multiple times where I was just like, really? This really is A Bug's Life. This is Zack Snyder's Bug's Life. I want to hear him admit that. If you thought that the first part was overly indulgent into Zack Snyder's worst tendencies as a filmmaker, whether it's the slow-mo or the lens flares or just a lot of like overly indulgent visuals, this is even more egregious. Like, it didn't bother me as much in the first part. I kind of just know that's what I'm getting into with a Snyder film. Here, I mean, there's like 30 minutes of montage of slow-mo grain harvesting. Not even ass-kickery, not even fight scenes or like epic, heroic comic book style frames. It's just fucking cutting wheat in slow-mo. And then it's just tenfold in the last half of the film with all the battle sequences. There's one in particular, the character that's like the cyborg Jedi with the two pseudo lightsabers. Her entire standout fight sequence here is entirely slow-mo. There's like no choreography that you can enjoy about it because every hit is like and my God, the lens flares. It just gave me a headache after a while. There's a sequence with the android, the one that's voiced by Anthony Hopkins, where there's so many different laser blasts going on and everyone has its own individual lens flare effect, and it's just like, fuck, I can't even see. The ending of this film, which I'm not going to talk too specifically because I don't really want to spoil it, I guess, but it leaves you in a place where it's so anticlimactic and so unsatisfying as the ending of a complete story, which these two halves are supposed to be, because it so clearly is just meant to set up all this other shit that Zack Snyder wants to do. It doesn't really close out anything. And beyond that, the little bit of victory that we do close out on here, the little bit of narrative that is brought to a conclusion by the end of this film, leaves you in a place that is damn near identical to the place that we left at the end of the first fucking half. But overall, the thing that literally puzzles me and boggles my brain about Rebel Moon now that we have both of these halves, and the thing that makes me a little more negative on the entire package now that I have the entire thing to see, is that these two films have very distinct issues that in any other context would seem like they are contradictory ideas, and yet they are running concurrent with each other in Rebel Moon. So this is, with the two halves put together, a 4-hour cut of a story that is intended to be 6 hours in total, and when you watch it together, all my brain kept thinking throughout this entire second half is like, okay, well, if this is how you were going to end this story, if this is what we were building up to in the first half, there's very clearly a 2 to 2.5 hour version of this story that would have been the best version of it. So while I'm watching this and I'm frustrated about all the things that are underdeveloped and undercooked and underexplored and are so clearly things that were cut out, and I'm eventually going to get this massive, much more in-depth version in a few months, while that's frustrating enough, you see a much smaller version of the story with even more cut out of it that would have been even better somehow. It would have made even more sense somehow. And so it's the weirdest thing where two things that should seem contradictory, I wanted more and yet I wanted less, is absolutely the fact of how I feel about Rebel Moon. The story that he's telling, the world that he's building, the lore that he's exploring is so unnecessarily convoluted and overindulgent that the base level storyline that they are going for is just overly derivative of other things. And if they had just done a 2 to 2.5 hour version of that, just, you know, Seven Samurai, Magnificent Seven, A Bug's Life, but Zack Snyder-fied, that could have been a cool 2.5 hour film. But turning it into this gigantic fucking epic space opera, it just seems overly indulgent and ridiculous now that I've seen the 4 hours that we have to watch right now. And that ultimately leads to my issue with the current era Zack Snyder, as somebody that has liked everything that he has done save for Sucker Punch up to this point, as somebody that, while I have major issues with it, is a defender of the ultimate cut of Batman v Superman, is somebody that totally champions the fact that his version of Justice League should have been the version released to theaters. Maybe some stuff cut out of it, but not the hack job that they got Joss Whedon to throw together. As somebody who sides with that side of the Zack Snyder fandom, I am very much a believer that he needs to rein in his storytelling. He needs to figure out how to go back to telling stories without needing a full fucking mini-series worth of runtime to do it. He needs to figure out how to make one version of a movie that fits what the studio wants, that fits a runtime and fits the rating that they greenlight him to make, without going to the DVD people and saying, hey, do you want to release my real version, not the shit that the fucking, studios made me put out? And you just hear him talk in interviews about this stuff, and it's just like, dude, I like what you do, and you're turning me off with the way that you're talking about your work, with the way that you're talking about your approach to things. Like, he had a quote here recently where he was being interviewed, and he basically said, hey, it's cool if you don't like my movies, but understand, a vote against me is a vote in favor of test audiences and, the studio's edits. And it's like, no, dude, it's not that fucking deep. You're not the gatekeeper of director's cuts versus theatrical cuts, okay? There are multitudes of filmmakers that can make their movie a very effective version for the theatrical length that they are greenlit for. And sometimes we get the director's cut and there's some cool extra goodies that maybe fans prefer those extra little bits. And sometimes it makes the film feel like, yeah, the theatrical cut, that was actually the most efficient and streamlined and well-paced version of this story. Nobody else in Hollywood is taking the stance that Zack Snyder takes, where it's just like, my shit's brilliant, but the studios and the test audiences keep fucking it up. So you got to be on my side and let me release these 5-hour movies every time. There's no reason the story he's telling here needed to be 6 hours long. There's no reason it needed to be 4 hours long and split into 2 films. There's just no reason. So overall, guys, I didn't hate the movie. I know I'm getting more passionate on the negative side of this. It's totally fine as a watch, but I did enjoy it a little bit less than I enjoyed the first half. I don't think it's a satisfying second half. I don't think it's a satisfying cut of the real film. And it's actually made me lose a significant amount of interest in watching the eventual 3-hour cuts that come out, and it made me lose basically all interest in Zack Snyder dedicating however many years of his life to doing 4 more of these fucking things. Like, if there's a lot of people that aren't on board for James Cameron doing 7 Avatar films, tenfold people are not on board for seeing 6 Rebel Moons. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of my 2024 new release reviews. I'm also going to put my review of Part 1 of Child of Fire for you to check out. Please like, share, hit that subscribe button if you are a fan of Zack Snyder. I'm probably going to do a ranking here next week about all of his films, so check that out. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.